I always believed loyalty was the backbone of my family, especially in a world built on oil, money, and ruthless competitors. I spent years holding everything together, fighting battles my father never even knew existed, repairing deals he broke, and saving an empire he was seconds away from losing. And I did it all quietly, believing that one day he'd finally see me, finally trust me, finally choose me. But the moment the crisis was over, when the company was stronger than ever, he handed everything, to my sister. The one who never stepped foot in the boardroom. The one who never cared about the business. The one who watched from the sidelines while I bled for it. I remember standing there, stunned, hearing him say the words as if they meant nothing. As if my sacrifice was disposable. As if I had been nothing more than a temporary patch until his favorite child returned. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Not anger. Not jealousy. Something much colder. Something that whispered that loyalty was a game only fools played, and I had been the biggest fool of all. They thought I'd walk away quietly. They thought I'd accept it. They were wrong. Because if they wanted to take everything from me, they had no idea how far I was willing to go to take it all back. Do you want to know what happens when the person you underestimated becomes your biggest threat? Before everything fell apart, my life felt like a delicate balance I'd spent years learning to hold steady. Most people saw only the polished surface, the woman who walked confidently through glass offices, who spoke in quiet, calculated tones, who always seemed prepared for whatever crisis came her way. But beneath that surface was someone who had grown up believing she had to earn her place in her own family. And in the world of oil, money, and legacy, nothing was ever guaranteed. I was the one who stayed close to the business, long before anyone expected me to. While my sister chased art residencies and weekend getaways, I sat through board meetings I wasn't officially invited to, learning to understand numbers, contracts, and the subtle shifts of power that made or broke entire empires. My father never asked me to. He barely acknowledged it. But I kept showing up, quietly proving myself in ways no one bothered to notice. My days were a blur of strategy calls, crisis management, and long nights spent poring over documents that would have put anyone else to sleep. I told myself it was worth it, that if I worked hard enough, long enough, he would finally see that I wasn't just another daughter. I was the only one willing to protect the empire he built. And I believed that with a kind of desperation I never dared to admit out loud. Outside of work, my life was simple. I had a small circle of friends who understood the unusual pressure that came with being born into wealth without having true access to it. I lived in a modest apartment, refusing to touch family money, hoping independence would prove something, maybe to my father, maybe to myself. On weekends, I'd take long drives outside the city just to breathe, the open road giving me a sense of freedom I never felt in corporate hallways. Still, there were signs, small ones, that something was off. Moments where my father would abruptly end conversations when I entered the room. Papers that disappeared from my desk without explanation. Decisions being made privately despite the fact that I had been the one fighting to stabilize everything during the company's worst year. I brushed it off as stress, exhaustion, or simply the way he had always been. Distant, unpredictable, impossible to read. But underneath the routine, a quiet tension began growing. Something in the air felt unsettled, as if I was being shifted out of place without realizing it. I'd walk into meetings and feel an odd stillness, like people knew something I didn't. And every time my sister suddenly appeared back home, smiling, carefree, welcomed with open arms, a strange discomfort spread through me. I wasn't jealous. It was something deeper. A warning, almost. An instinct I tried to ignore. Looking back, the clues were everywhere. But at the time, I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself that after everything I'd done, the crises I handled, the deals I repaired, the storms I walked straight into, there was no way I could be blindsided. No way my loyalty could be twisted into something as insignificant as a footnote. But betrayal doesn't arrive loudly. It creeps in quietly, through the cracks left behind by trust. And even as I kept building, kept fighting, kept believing I mattered, a decision had already been made behind closed doors. A decision that would unravel everything I thought I knew about my family, my future, and my place in the empire I helped save. I just didn't know it yet. I didn't discover the betrayal in a dramatic burst of revelation. It began quietly, small, disjointed pieces that didn't make sense until they formed a picture so painful I could barely breathe. It started with a postponed meeting, then another, then a request that I take some time off, phrased so gently it felt rehearsed. My father insisted I looked exhausted, that I needed rest, that he could handle things for a while. It almost made me laugh. He had never worried about my exhaustion before. But I accepted it because pushing back felt suspiciously like walking into a trap I couldn't see yet. Still, I kept my eyes open. And that's when I noticed the shift. A new legal team suddenly occupied the conference room I always used. The CFO began avoiding my calls. Files I'd been working on for months were suddenly inaccessible. Security guards who used to nod politely now glanced at me for a second too long, as if they were waiting for instructions. It wasn't paranoia. It was preparation, just not mine. One evening, after everyone left the building, I returned to my office to retrieve a folder I needed for the next day. But when I scanned my badge, a red light blinked. Access denied. I tried again. Denied. A strange calm washed over me. Not confusion. Don't panic. Just a cold, steady clarity, because whatever was happening wasn't an accident. So I walked around to the back entrance, the one most people didn't know about, and slipped inside. The corridors were dark, silent, almost eerie. I made my way toward my father's office, thinking maybe he'd left something on his desk that would explain the sudden change. But I didn't find any papers. I found voices. My father's, low and tired, and my sister's, light, smooth, completely unbothered. She's become too involved, he was saying. It wasn't supposed to be her responsibility long term. She's not built for leadership, my sister replied. You know that. There was a pause. Then my father sighed. She'll get over it. Just let her think it was my idea. My heart hammered so hard I thought they might hear it through the walls. I stepped back quietly, my palms cold, my throat tight. The truth hit me all at once. This wasn't a misunderstanding or temporary shift. They were removing me. Silently. Strategically. Permanently. I walked out of the building that night knowing things would never be the same. The official announcement came the next morning. My sister was named the new CEO of the company. My father described it as a necessary transition, praising her vision, creativity, and fresh approach. Words he had never, not once, used about me. Words he barely believed himself, but said anyway because this was always the ending they'd planned behind my back. As I sat in the audience, the applause felt like needles against my skin. People I'd worked beside for years couldn't even look me in the eye. A few offered sympathetic smiles, the kind people give right before they step away from a crumbling building. But the worst part wasn't the announcement. It was the moment my sister glanced at me, wearing a triumphant smile she didn't bother to hide. The kind that said she believed she'd won. That everything I'd built, everything I'd saved, now belonged to her. And for a moment, everything inside me went silent. Not empty. Not broken. Just cold. What they didn't know was that months earlier, during a downturn so severe it nearly bankrupted us, I was the one who saved the company. Not with a miracle, not with luck, through long nights, brutal decisions, and sacrifices that still haunted me. My father had panicked and nearly sold the business, but I had stepped in, securing deals and alliances that pulled us back from the edge. I kept records. I kept evidence. And I kept all documentation of the moves I made to protect the company, when he couldn't. They thought stripping me of my position erased my impact. It didn't. It only illuminated how much they didn't understand the empire they were trying to control. But I didn't act immediately. Revenge isn't born from impulse. It's born from calculation. So I observed. I noticed my sister's inability to handle the board's pressure. I saw cracks forming in the alliances I'd built. I watched my father rely on advisors who valued their own interests far more than his. I saw an empire beginning to rot at its core because the one person holding it together, me, had been pushed out. And still I said nothing. Not when my sister made a disastrous PR call. Not when a key investor threatened to pull out. Not when rumors leaked of internal conflict. I watched quietly, patiently, letting their careless decisions accumulate like a stack of dry branches waiting for a spark. Meanwhile, I worked in the shadows. I met privately with key partners, reminding them who had truly protected their interests. I pulled financial reports and cross-referenced old contracts, revealing vulnerabilities they had ignored. I built connections they never saw coming. And I waited. Because revenge isn't about destroying someone quickly. It's about letting them walk straight into the downfall they created, until the moment they look up and realize you're the one they pushed too far. The tipping point arrived on a rainy evening when my sister burst into my apartment unannounced, tears streaking her face, panic twisting her usually confident expression. She begged me for help, confessing that the company was on the brink of collapse again. Deals were falling through. Investors were panicking. The board was turning against her. She expected me to comfort her, to fix everything the way I always had, to save her from consequences she had never been prepared to face. As she stood in my doorway, shaking, waiting for me to step in as her safety net, I felt something unexpected. Not pity, not guilt. Relief. Because the moment had finally arrived. The moment they needed me more than I had ever needed them. The moment everything could be taken back. The moment revenge stopped being a plan and became a choice. What she didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that I had already positioned myself to reclaim everything they had stolen from me. The only question was how far I was willing to go. And the answer had already been written the night they locked me out of my own office. I'd always imagined the moment of my revenge would feel loud, explosive, dramatic, impossible to ignore. But when it finally arrived, it unfolded in a silence, so sharp it felt like the world had stopped breathing with me. It began the morning of the emergency board meeting. My sister had called it in a panic, desperate to regain control of a company slipping through her fingers. I wasn't supposed to be there. I hadn't held an official title in months. But as cars lined the driveway and executives filed into the glass building, I walked through the doors with a calmness that felt foreign, almost dangerous. No one stopped me. They glanced at me with a mixture of confusion and unease, expressions people wore when they sensed something was shifting but didn't yet understand the direction of the wind. I made my way to the boardroom, the same one I used to prepare for late-night strategy sessions, the same one from which I had been quietly pushed out. My sister stood at the head of the table, pale, shaky, her notes scattered and smudged. My father sat beside her, jaw clenched, eyes dull with exhaustion. The empire he had thought he was preserving was dissolving in front of him. And they both knew it, but they didn't know what I was about to do. When I entered, every voice in the room fell silent. My sister stiffened. My father's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed with the beginnings of a warning. I said nothing. I simply walked to the opposite end of the table, placed a thick leather folder on the glossy wood, and opened it. Inside were months' worth of documented evidence. Every strategic action I had taken to save the company during its darkest hour. Every email, confirmation, and signed agreement that proved I, not my father, not my sister, had been the architect of the company's survival. And beneath that were records of the questionable decisions made after I was removed. Mismanagement, unapproved spending, ignored contracts, and the mishandling of a major investor that had triggered the current crisis. The room felt colder with every page I turned. I didn't come here to argue. I finally said, my voice steady. I came here because the board deserves to know the truth. I expected my sister to interrupt, to shout, to deny everything. Instead, she simply stared, her expression collapsing as the reality of what I'd brought sank in. My father reached for something to say, some excuse, some justification, but no words came. One of the board members leaned forward, scanning the documents with widening eyes. Another began whispering to the person beside him. A ripple of shifting chairs and nervous glances moved through the room as the truth settled like dust on untouched furniture. My sister tried to speak. "You're twisting." "No," I said quietly, cutting her off. "I'm not twisting anything. I'm showing what you tried so hard to hide. I slid one final document across the table. A projected financial analysis, my analysis, showing precisely when the company began to decline. The date aligned perfectly with her appointment as CEO. The room erupted into questions, accusations, demands for explanations. My father stood abruptly, his voice trembling with authority he no longer possessed. This isn't the place. It's the only place, I answered. Because you made your decision behind closed doors. You chose secrecy, favoritism, and pride over competence. Over fairness. Over me. For a moment, the only sound was the soft hum of the lights overhead. Then the chairman spoke. Calmly. Decisively. We need to consider a leadership transition. Effective immediately. My sister's breath caught. My father staggered, as if someone had struck him. But I felt nothing. Not triumph, not satisfaction. Just the weight of inevitability settling where pain used to live. They had built their future on the assumption that I would always take the fall quietly. But I had stopped being quiet the moment they locked me out of my own office. The board's voices grew louder, more insistent. Some asked about interim leadership. Others asked for my recommendations. A few asked if I would consider stepping into the role officially. My sister looked at me then, really looked at me. For the first time in her life, she saw me not as the sister who would clean up her messes, not as the daughter seeking approval, but as a threat. A force she had underestimated until it was too late. You can't do this, she whispered, her voice breaking. You can't just take everything. I met her eyes, calm in a way that scared even me. I'm not taking anything, I said. I'm reclaiming what I built. My father tried to step between us, but the board had already separated his authority from the room's power. Decisions were no longer his to make. One of the directors cleared his throat. Given the evidence and the current crisis, we propose reinstating her in an executive capacity, potentially as CEO. Every gaze turned to me. Every voice fell silent. And in that quiet, I realized something. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about recognition, about truth, about taking back a legacy I had earned, not through birthright, but through resilience, sacrifice, and a determination that had been forged in the shadows of betrayal. I exhaled slowly, letting the moment settle before I spoke. I'll consider it, I said, but not on the terms that failed this company before. If I return, it's under one condition. Everything changes. My father looked at me as if he'd never seen me before. My sister looked at me as if I'd taken away the world she believed she deserved. And for the first time in my life, I felt something close to peace. But peace was temporary. There was still one final decision to make, and it would determine whether the story ended with justice or something far darker. Because reclaiming the empire was only the beginning, and what I chose next would define everything that followed. In the days following the board meeting, everything moved with a strange, almost eerie smoothness, like a machine that had been broken for years suddenly snapping back into place. My sister stepped down quietly, guided not by pride, but by the undeniable truth laid out in front of her. My father retreated into silence, not because he was defeated, but because he finally saw what he had refused to acknowledge for so long, that the daughter he overlooked had become the backbone of everything he'd built. The board offered me the position officially within a week. Their voices were steady, their faces unreadable, but there was a sense of relief in the room, as if they were finally giving responsibility to the person who had been holding it all together in the shadows. I accepted, but not with the triumphant flourish most people imagine. It wasn't victory that washed over me. It was something far more complicated. Because revenge isn't clean. It doesn't wrap itself neatly around your heart and leave you feeling whole. It settles in you like a storm, thrilling, powerful, but also heavy, reminding you of every step you took to get here. My first act as CEO wasn't to celebrate or punish. It was to rebuild. I dismantled the layers of secrecy my father had cultivated. I brought transparency to the financials, accountability to the leadership, and structure to the chaos that my sister had left behind. And as the company slowly steadied itself, Investors returned with a confidence I hadn't seen in years. They weren't responding to a name or a legacy, they were responding to results. But behind the progress, an emotional reckoning was unfolding. One evening, well after the office had emptied, I found myself alone in the boardroom, the same place where everything shifted, where years of silence and sacrifice erupted into truth. I stood there, hands resting on the cool surface of the table, staring at my reflection in the glass. For the first time, I didn't see the girl who tried to prove herself to her father. I saw the woman who walked back into a room designed to erase her and rewrote the ending. Still, something inside me felt unsettled. Because revenge had given me power, but power didn't erase the hurt. It didn't fix the years of being invisible. And it didn't rebuild the relationship with the people who had broken my trust. My sister visited me days later. She didn't bring excuses or apologies. She simply stood in the doorway of my office, eyes softer than I'd ever seen them. "I didn't understand how much it meant to you," she said quietly. "I thought you'd always catch me, even when I didn't deserve it." I didn't respond at first. The silence between us was heavy, filled with memories of loyalty, resentment, unspoken competition. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was acknowledging the truth. And that was more powerful than any apology could have been. My father came to me eventually too, though not with the humility my sister showed. His pride had always been a fortress, strong, unyielding, impossible to climb. He stood across from me, older than I remembered, his shoulders weighed down by the consequences of choices he could no longer undo. "You did well," he said, his voice strained. "Better than I expected." It wasn't the apology I once craved, but it was the closest he could get. And maybe that was enough. Because my revenge wasn't about destroying them, it was about taking back what I had earned, what I had built, and what they believed I would walk away from. But the cost of revenge, that stays with you. Late nights at the office became moments of quiet reflection. Every decision felt heavier, every success tinged with scar tissue. The empire was finally mine, but it came with a truth I couldn't ignore. Revenge gives you closure, but it doesn't give you peace. Peace had to be something I built, the same way I rebuilt the company, slowly, patiently, with intention. I allowed myself to feel proud without letting that pride turn into arrogance. I reminded myself that power wasn't about proving others wrong. It was about holding yourself steady when the world tries to shake you. Looking back now, I realize my story isn't just about corporate betrayal. It's about every person who has ever been underestimated, overlooked, or pushed aside. It's about the quiet fighters, the ones who don't shout for recognition but earn it with every sacrifice. It's about the moment you decide you're done playing small to make others comfortable. And most of all, it's about reclaiming the parts of yourself you were taught to hide. I didn't just take the empire back. I took myself back. My voice, my strength, my worth. And maybe that's the real victory. So let me leave you with this, because if you've listened this far, something in my story has touched a familiar place in you. When someone betrays you, when they dismiss you, when they steal what you've built, what do you owe them? Silence or justice? Think about it. Because sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't what you take from them. It's what you finally allow yourself to claim.